Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I wanted to talk about just drawing shapes from scratch in Visio today. For our subject, we're gonna do things like these valves, these manual valves, or just simple valves, stuff like that. There's probably a set of Visio shapes out there that you could find for something like this, but the point is to show you how to actually use the drawing tools and some of the less obvious tricks that will help you to get things done. Because if you use Visio a lot and you like to do some custom things that aren't just like business process management or flowcharts, you're going to run into the need to create something every once in a while. So let's get to it. So when you want to start drawing shapes, there's a few things to look for before you even get going. So the first thing is you're going to need some drawing tools. A lot of times you'll see a rectangle here by default, but since I've been messing around, there's a line tool here. But anyway, we're on the Home ribbon tab, and we're in the Tools group. And if we click this drop down, you can see there's the bunch of useful tools here. Pencil, rectangle, and line. Those are the ones we're going to use today for the most part. Before you even start drawing, though, I find it helpful to have this grid and some snapping to this grid on so I can kind of keep track of how big my things are. Now, of course, you can resize your shapes later, and you can to any size you want, but it's just nice to be doing things in proportions of 1 to 2 or 2 to 2 or 1 to 1 or 3 to 1, depending on how you want to draw the shape. And then you can size everything to match up later. So to get the grid to show, you want to go to the View tab, and you can see there's a ruler. We can turn that on and off. That's not really important for today. There's the grid. We can turn that on and off. And then there's some visual aids here. And you want to click on this little dialog box launcher here to make sure things are working. So we've got snap and glue are on. The drawing aids are nice. The dynamic grid, we don't really want that on. That's like when you're drawing a flow chart and there you get all these green lines that help you line flowchart shapes up and keep equal spacing and things like that. It will actually get in our way today, so make sure that's off. Drawing aids, those can be some useful things. I won't get into what they are today. They might pop up while we're drawing. And then just make sure that we have snap to grid, maybe snap to ruler, things like that. That's the most important thing, is we want to make sure that things are snapping. So we want to draw this basic valve like this guy here. Let's just zoom in a little bit. I'm using some keyboard shortcuts to zoom in. Control Shift plus left click will take me in. Control Shift plus right click will take me out. Things like that make it easy to move around. So if you wonder how I'm moving around, just realize I'm using some keyboard shortcuts. So let's go back to the Home tab. And when I see this valve, I think, well, let's just start with a rectangle. And you might think, what is he talking about? Starting with a rectangle? We need two triangles, right? Well, yes and no. And this is kind of the reason I wanted to make this video, is just to show this trick, because it illustrates a lot of things you can do when you're drawing with Visio. So we can pick the line tool and click on this shape, and you'll see maybe that there's these 4 blue handles, and that there's a vertex at each corner. Now, Microsoft has made these things smaller and smaller and harder to see over the years. It looks like they're getting slightly better now. They've got a little white around the blue. Hopefully I can zoom the video in so you can see this better. But they used to be nice bright green dots, and when you clicked on them they turned red. They still turn red now, but they're just teeny and they're really difficult to see. If you get the pencil tool and click on this rectangle, you'll actually get 4 more handles at the midpoints, and those allow you to bend a line and make it into a circular arc like that. So we'll just undo that, and we'll not worry about that for now. So let's go back to this line tool, and if I just click on it and it turns red, now I can drag it. Okay, you can also just grab it and drag it, but sometimes these handles are so small, I find it hard to get it the first time, so I like to sometimes just click on it, make sure it's red, and then I look for those crosshairs. So you don't have to do that. You can just grab it and drag it. But you can see right there, we've created a valve. Super simple. We just drew a rectangle and inverted 2 of the vertexes. And that's why you want to have this snap to grid on, so that you know that this is perfectly drawn, because you can kind of feel it snap into these rectangles. Now, a lot of people think, oh, maybe we should put some incoming and outgoing lines, pipes on this valve shape. but I don't think that's really necessary. It does give a visual clue that this should be connected to some pipe and at this point and this point, and that there shouldn't be stuff coming in like up from up here. But I think people that are making PID drawings, in this case, they'll know how to use these shapes. So let's not do that. And instead, let's put a connection point on each point so that we can have say a pipe coming into the thing, and it'll snap right here and it'll snap right here, instead of just sort of gluing to the shape, which is sort of default Visio behavior. See, we don't really want that to happen. See, this one, they call it dynamic glue or walking glue, where the connector will sort of walk around the shape. See, we certainly don't want that. So that's bad stuff. So let's get back to where we were. Okay, get rid of this connector, and let's talk about connection points for a second. So this is the connection point tool. And you want to make sure that you can see connection points. So let's see where it is. View, Visual Aids, connection point, that's on. Back to the connection point tool. We'll click on that, and we'll click on the shape. And now you have to remember to hold down the control key to actually add connection points. So when I do this, you can see a little red dot shows up there. And I click over here, and a little red dot shows up there. And again, Microsoft has made these things super hard to see. They used to be these wonderful purple X's or blue X's that you could see. They were almost too distracting if you had a lot of them on a page. So they've made them harder to see when you're editing them. But I can click on this again. Once it's there, I can click on it. It turns red, and I can, oops, I told you it was hard. And I can actually move it way off the shape, which is not particularly useful in this case. So we'll just do that, and we'll switch back to, say, the connector tool. And you can see the connection points disappeared until we get close to the shape and we have something that can actually do something with a connection point. In this case, the connector tool can actually glue to those points. And if I switch back to the pointer tool and move the shape around, you can see those things stay glued to those ends. So that's pretty cool. Another thing I like to do, because the snapping in some respects seems to have gotten worse over the years, sometimes I like to check that I've actually put these connection points in the right place. You'll notice I can't see it right now. I can click on the X, and then I do see them. I can try to zoom in, but I can't really see them because they're small. Let's change the color. Let's move this thing out of the way. Okay, we can see that's there. That looks pretty good. Let's pull this connection off. You can see that's pretty good. But if you're really a stickler for accuracy, let's turn this black again. You can show the shape sheet. So now I've right-clicked on this shape, and the shape sheet shows. And this will only show if you have the developer toolbar turned on. So you have to go to customize the ribbon and make sure that this developer tool is checked. Okay, I always have that on because I'm a super Visio nerd, and it's always ready to go. So if we right click on the shape, show the shape sheet, you can see the connection point row is here, and you can toggle between values and formulas. You want to make sure you have formulas, and you can see that this one is at the width times 0, which is all the way to the left, and it's at height times 0.5, which is exactly what we want. This connection point is on the right side, which is width times 1 and height times 0.5. What happens is if the snap isn't working or your mouse isn't super accurate, you end up with 0.44995 or something crazy like that. It looks good maybe when you're over here, but it's not quite right. So I like to come in here and make sure everything's perfect, so that if we have shapes that are lined up, we won't have connectors that are slightly jagged a little bit. They're just off by a little bit like this because the shapes aren't quite lined up. I can't really do it without having a shape. But anyway, you don't want connections that are slightly at an angle or zigzaggy because the shape's connection points aren't perfectly lined up. So that's one thing we have there to make these shapes a little bit useful and to actually allow us to do less drawing. We don't have to draw these incoming and outgoing pipes. Another thing I wanted to add while we're talking about the shape sheet is if I have the connector tool, let's start over with the connector tool. So we're using this to lay pipes and connect pipes to our valves. You'll see that there's this kind of highlighting going on. Okay, that's again this dynamic glue. That means I can just glue to this shape, and it looks like Visio will try to find a connection point that's close. But what you can see here is if there isn't a connection point close, because we only have one on the left and right, remember, it'll do this dynamic glue again. And this is absolutely wrong for something like a PID shape where the input and output may have specific meanings. Okay, so there's one more thing we can do, and this is really only available in the shape sheet as far as I know, is we can change the glue to behavior of this shape so that it does not accept this walking glue. So let's again right click on our valve, and we're going to go way down to, I got a note here, way down to the glue type section here. And if I double click on this cell, I get a little drop down with some named constants that help me remember some of these values. Otherwise, you'd have to remember 8. And this says Vis glue type no walking to. So that's type 8. That sounds like what we want. I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm going to get that connect tool again. And you'll see that I don't get that green anymore. And when I drag this here, I can't, it doesn't just magically try to glue to the shape and figure it out later. I can really only glue to this point or this point. So I would bring an incoming connector like this and an outgoing pipe like that, and that is a much better structured shape. So we'll clean this up, and we'll add a little bit more to this and maybe wrap this video up. So next thing I want to do is add a little bit more to this valve, maybe do something like the pneumatic valve here, like this, add this little hat onto it. Now you'll notice something interesting about this shape is that the handles exactly match the original sort of simple valve rectangle. They don't encompass this ball up here, and you can do that in several ways. And the easiest way is just to draw this thing on here. You know, you can kind of go like this. I'm going to go like this so that I can get the pencil tool and kind of make this an arc first and bring it over here. Okay, it's pretty easy just to draw those things like this, and then group them. Okay, so I selected both shapes, right click, and group them. Okay, but now this selection box, this alignment box for the shape, is bigger than the simple one that we started with. And what that does is it makes it hard to align shapes when you're drawing. So I can cheat here. I can sub-select and drag out a copy of this. And you know, this will work pretty well here. We can line these up by eye and snapping to the grid and things like that. But when you start having, you know, maybe this was a little bit taller, it was up here, and then you know, trust me, it just starts to get hard to keep things aligned when you draw things like that. It's nicer just to have the alignment boxes all match, and you can see that when I drag all these shapes out here, they all sort of are based on that root valve. Even the four-way valve, they all have this same selection box, which makes them easy to line up. Okay, so how can we do that with our shape? Well, one thing we can do is, let's just ungroup this first. We could, when we start drawing this stuff, just keep it smaller than the group. Okay, and I'll just do group, and now we can sub-select and move stuff outside of the group. And now it stays like that. So that's really easy to do. Now, this is a pretty simple shape, but now we've made it a group plus this subshape plus this subshape plus this subshape. So now this shape is actually 4 Visio shapes. And Visio shapes can be a little bit heavy. So sometimes if you think you're going to have drawings that have lots and lots of shapes like a PID drawing might have, you want to make these shapes as small and light as possible. So how could we do this as a single shape? And the only reason we need the only reason we need to group is if we need multiple text blocks, or if we have shapes that have different fill or line qualities. So there's no way I can make a single shape that has a black pneumatic valve and a white valve body. But if everything's the same, maybe we just want really simple lines, there's no reason to group if we can figure out how to draw it. So let's explore some tricks for doing this without grouping. Okay, so first trick, this is actually really cool. If we get the line tool, we can add geometry to an existing shape on the fly by holding, let's see, I think it's Control Shift and then click and drag. Okay, so I did Control Shift and I clicked and drag. So let's start adding some of that hat part. And then once you have a piece of geometry there, then you can just kind of drag out of it. So I got that one, this T part drawn, and now once it's there, I can take my finger off the Control Shift key and just click and drag from here. So we'll hook that up later. And I'm staying inside the alignment box for a reason. But first I just want to prove to you that this is a single shape. Okay? And if we even look inside the shape sheet, you can see there's a geometry 1. That's the Black Widow valve shape. Then there's this vertical bar, and then there's this wedge that we haven't finished yet. Okay, so this is going to be a smaller shape, easier for Visio to handle hundreds of these on a page, just snappier drawing, and it's just a simpler shape overall. So if I take this shape, the line tool, and I start moving stuff outside of the box, you can see, oops, the alignment box got bigger. So we don't want that to happen. Now the solution when it was a group was pretty easy. You know, we can just draw stuff inside this rectangle, group it, then move stuff out later. But with a single shape, it gets a little bit trickier. So we have to go back to the shape sheet again. And there's this really obscure, this is shape sheet for 2000, Alex. Down in this protection section, there's this mysterious shape called lock calc with height. And all we got to do is set that to 1, or you can type in even true, I think, and it'll just revert to 1. So now that we're going to preserve the width height calculation no matter what we do, and watch what happens when I drag something out of here, like this. That alignment box doesn't get any bigger. Okay, so it's a really nerdy trick, but if you want to keep things small and fast and lightweight, it's a nice way to go. So let's make this shape look a little bit more like this pneumatic valve over here. And another thing you can do is if we can first of all drag this down to the middle. We'll drag this up to about there. Now I can move the whole thing by clicking on one vertex, it turns red, shift click the next one. I got the shift key held down, and now I can move them all together like that. This is not quite in the right spot. Let's make it as wide. Let's make the plunger as wide as the sort of the base, the minimum dimension of the valve. So now let's go get the pencil tool and add a little bit of arcness to that. Now we can grab this vertex and drag it over here. You can see the fill actually took hold as soon as I did that. We'll give it a little color so you can see. And let's make this a little bit taller so everything kind of matches up. So maybe that's too high. So again, we can just click here, hold down Shift key, click here. We'll drag this down. And we'll do that same for this. And now we've got a valve shape that's not just a simple valve, it's a pneumatic valve shape that's pretty tight and lightweight. It's a single shape, and it has these connection points that you have to connect to. You can't connect a dynamic glue to the shape. So that's about all we got to do for this today. Let's just summarize what we've talked about. So we were talking about the PID shapes, drawing shapes from scratch. We've got our line, pencil, and rectangle tools. Control Shift, we can add geometry on the fly. That's kind of a neat trick. I don't think very many people know about that. We can use the line or pencil tool to click on the vertices or vertexes, and we can Shift click to select multiple vertexes at once and move them. We can add connection points with the connection point tool. Remember, you got to hold down Control when you're adding them to a shape, otherwise yeah, nothing will happen. And then we can use the shape sheet to go in and check those connection points. We can set the glue type to no walking to, or type 8, so that you're forced to connect two connection points if you have points on a shape that actually have some sort of logical or physical meaning in the real world, and you don't want just the dynamic glue that wanders around. And again, we can use lock calc with height to make sure that geometry can be taken outside of a shape without changing the size of the alignment box. So thanks for watching. I know there's some pretty nerdy topics here, but if you find yourself needing to draw shapes, I think you'll find these tips pretty valuable. So thanks for watching.